Some time ago, a newspaper reported on an automobile accident and included the following information. Passerbys carried the driver to a nearby service station. The crash victim came to, and as he opened his eyes, he panicked, struggling mightily to break away from the circle of Good Samaritans and onlookers who had gathered around him. Whereupon a rescue team arrived, quickly subduing him and taking him to the hospital. Asked later why he had made a desperate attempt to get away from his rescuers, the man exclaimed that they had taken him to the nearby Shell station, but someone was standing in front of the S. I'm glad you're paying attention. This simple newspaper story reminds us, like today's reading from Genesis and today's gospel reading, of our ability to create hells on earth, of our great ability and inclination to distance ourselves from God. Addiction is a hard word. It conjures up horrifying images of life-threatening dependence on some kind of drug or alcohol that robs us of our ability to control our lives. The reality is that every last one of us has some form of addiction. Those things we cannot imagine ourselves living without. It may be eating, or shopping, or blaming, or work, or even taking care of others. We can find ourselves easily addicted to the newest and the latest, the hottest and the most fashionable. Our addiction may be our obsession with our computer, or electronic toys, or our favorite band, or our golf clubs. If we are honest, and Lent is a time for honesty, then we must admit that we are all addicted to habits, substances, or surroundings that comfort us, that provide us refuge, that block out what scares or hurts us. At the same point in our lives, however, we find ourselves in some kind of desert or wilderness, deprived of our addictions. We experience emptiness within ourselves that our addiction simply cannot fill. We are suddenly exposed, like someone addicted to painkillers and their prescription has run out and there are no refills left. It is hard. It is awful. It is painful. But to become fully human, it is necessary to encounter the world without an anesthetic, so that we may find out what life is like with no comfort but our God. This may be the simplest definition of addiction. Anything we use to fill the empty place inside us that belongs to God alone. My friends, the season of Lent calls us once again to leave our addictions and pacifiers, our comfort food and our toys behind, and journey to the desert. Journey to the desert to be alone, with nothing and no one except our God. It is time for each of us to take a hard look at the addictions that control us and to regain control of our time and values so that we will become the man or woman God has created us to be. The story we find in Genesis today is among my favorites when it comes to dealing with sin in our lives. Here you have God's greatest creation, you and me, being sucker punched by a scheming and pathetic, scaly little snake in the grass. The part we do not have in today's reading is the conversation between God and the man and the woman. From the beginning of creation, human beings have played and become masters of the blame game. The original TV reality series, if you would. Well, she gave it to me. You didn't have to eat it. The devil made me do it. And all the while, the snake is perched in the tree of forbidden fruit with that cat who just swallowed the canary grin on its face. If we ever stop long enough to estimate how much energy and time any one of us wastes by trying to defend an indefensible position before God, imagine all the good we could accomplish by redirecting that energy and time to the mission of Christ and his church. Sometimes it is as simple as asking the right question, which reminds me of a police officer who pulls over a motorist. "Sir," the officer says, "you need to breathe into this breathalyzer for me." "Well, I can't do that," comes the response from the driver. "I'm an asthmatic. If I do that, I may have an asthma attack." "Okay," the policeman says, "then I'll need you to come down to the station so that we can take some blood work, just to make sure." "Oh, I'm afraid I can't do that either. You see, I'm a hemophiliac, and if I do that, I'm afraid I might bleed to death." The patient but weary officer says, "Okay, fine. Then you'll have to provide a urine sample." "I can't do that either, officer. I'm sorry, but I'm a diabetic. And if I do that, my sugar level, well, it may get really, really low." "All right, then. Why don't you get out of the car and walk this line for me?" the officer suggests. "I'm afraid I can't do that either, officer." "Why not?" "Because I'm drunk," comes the driver's response. The officer finally asks the right question, and the intoxicated driver has to own up to the reality of his situation. Lent confronts us each time it rolls around with the same kind of questions. In the austerity and simpleness of Lent, the justifications and the rationalizations we have devised to insulate ourselves from the unhappy, discomforting dimensions of our lives fall to the wayside, and we must face who we are, what we believe, how we are living our lives, and the gap that often exists between the lives we want and the lives we are actually struggling through. May we be ready this Lent to grow, ready to join Jesus in the desert wilderness, so that we too might confront the choices we make, the values we keep, to guide our lives through the reasons of our despair, for our disappointments, and for our fears. May this be the Lent we are ready to grow, ready to accept God's grace and wisdom, ready to ask the right questions, ready to confront with honesty and resolve whatever obstacles block or derail our journey from coming home together to the Lord. May our desert time alone with God over the next 40 days of this season of Lent, leaving behind our addictions and obsessions, help us refill our souls with the wisdom and grace of this God of ours, who is constantly seeking us out and always calling us back to him. Amen.